9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Please welcome to the stage the founder of Black Hat, Jeff Moss.
Wow. We are back in full effect this year for the 25th anniversary. This is amazing. Everybody just keeps coming and coming to the show, and I want to share with you a little bit of the history of how we all got here. But before we get started, I've got some little announcement notes. I'm going to talk a little bit about the creation of Black Hat, a couple of my thoughts, and then it's going to be my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker today, Chris Krebs. So okay, let's get started. I normally run through all the countries where people have come to Black Hat to attend to try to show how global of a community we are. This year there's people from 111 different countries here, which is, I'm not going to go through them. It's going to take a while. I used to go through just the countries that had one person, and then you get to 30 or 40 countries that had just one person attending. So now I'm just kind of aggregating it, but I'm letting you know the planet is here, and it's because we're all hungry for the same thing. We're all trying to figure out what the fuck is going on. I mean, just when we think we have it figured out, things change. And if you asked me 25 years ago, like, how dynamic would it be? I would seriously say most of security would be baked in 25 years, right? And they figured out how to launch rockets in 25 years, get to the moon in 25 years. A lot of things have been figured out in a quarter century. We're still like trying to figure out, did you try turning it on and off? You know? So don't feel bad if you're still trying to figure out what's going on. To try to keep the community growing, because we all are getting older, because we're not solving this problem space anytime soon, how do we bring up the next generation? How do we encourage more inclusion, more diverse perspectives? Because when it was just a network engineer trying to get the computer to work, you needed a certain engineering perspective. But now when you're dealing with mis and dis malinformation, you're dealing with social impacts of technology, we need a lot more people in the room trying to explain what's going on, right? What the unintended consequences of the technology are. And so to do that, Black Hat over the years have been sponsoring scholarships for different communities to try to bring them in to our community. And so no different this year. We have a student scholarship program. 132 scholarships were handed out. If you're in the audience when I'm calling out any of these things, you want to raise your hand and meet the people around you, please do. So if you're a student who got a scholarship program, please raise your hand. Thank you for excellent. Yeah. You don't have any idea what you've signed on for, do you? The Black Hat Veteran Scholarship Program, 15. The Executive Women's Forum, 35. Women in Security and Privacy, 23. The Women's Society of Cyberjitsu, 25. The Diana Initiative, 25. And Black Girls Hack, 25. So thank you all for doing the time to apply for the scholarship. And welcome. So I'm going to delve briefly into sort of the early days of Black Hat. And I don't talk about this much because when you're so close to it, you sort of assume everybody knows it. But you realize they probably don't, and maybe you'd find it interesting on our 25th anniversary. So in the early days, there was nothing really of consequence online. So there really wasn't a lot of damage you could do if you hacked stuff. But when the dot-com boom started building and everybody wanted to go online and try e-commerce, the hackers, we naturally ended up being the people who got the jobs because there weren't enough people who understood how the network worked. And I knew something was boiling around DEF CON 3 or 4. I started getting requests to make a professional sounding announcement. And if you know DEF CON, I mean, it's half party, half hacker shenanigans. It's like the last thing I wanted to do was make a professional sounding announcement for DEF CON. But I did. I made it all very professional. You could give it to your boss and trick him into thinking he was going to a real conference. And then it happened the next year again. And it's like, I don't want to keep making these fake professional announcements. And my friend, Ray Kaplan, one of the original Unix graybeards from DEC, he said, you know what? You should just do the conference they want. Charge them a lot of money. Give them food, like a program. Make it a real conference. I was like, that's a brilliant idea, but I don't have any money. And so I started it a year later. We started Black Hat a year later than I wanted to, but I had got a loan, and it was originally called, well, it was almost called the Network Security Conference. How brilliant sounding is that? Because, you know, there's some networking and there's some security. But also at the time, we were starting to put colors on everything, right? The black hat and the white hat. And so I was talking it over with some friends at work, and the marketing director came by for the company I was working at, Secure Computing Corporation. No longer in existence, the very first internet security stock ever listed on the NASDAQ. And the marketing director came by and said, NSC sounds terrible. Black Hat sounds spooky. You should do that. And she walks away. And I was like, okay, if she says she's a marketing person, I'll believe her. And it was originally called the Black Hat Briefings. Now we're Black Hat. But we were the Black Hat Briefings because the idea was we wanted to tell you what the Black Hats were up to. We were going to brief you on the Black Hats. And the whole concept was sort of a crystal ball of if the hackers and the early security researchers thought this stuff was interesting, then maybe you would think it was interesting. And if they were worried about it today, maybe it'll be a problem for you tomorrow. And that was sort of our formula, very applied, hands-on practitioner. And that wasn't a master plan. That was just who I knew. I mean, I literally called up my friends and said, hey, I'm trying to do this thing. You want to speak? So the community forms around who you know. And so it was like Bruce Schneier and Mudge and Dominique Brzezinski, Alex Shostak, Hobbit. It was just Rout, the editor of Frack magazine. It's whoever you knew. You called your buddies together. And none of us knew how to run a conference, right? There's no books on it. There was no Google or Amazon books on how to run a conference. So we figured it out. Much like everything else in security, we've had to learn along the way. And we've seen it all. Remember when we were going to publish reports and inform the consumers on how to buy products? And informed consumers would make the better choice and buy the more secure product. That didn't work. But that's okay. We have our backup plan. Our backup plan is insurance companies, because now companies are moving online. And once companies are online, they're beholden to the insurance companies. And the insurance companies will force them to buy the more secure product. And then when the companies buy the secure product, the consumers will follow. Okay, but that's okay. We have a backup plan. It's called regulation. Okay, so now we're back to trying to educate consumers again. So we're in this life cycle, and we have a couple new challenges going forward. And I'm going to briefly just talk about one of them. So we think we kind of know how it all works. I've talked in the past about sort of team rule of law and team undecided, all the countries in the middle who are being pulled one way or the other, and then team authoritarian. And really it's an argument over control of information. The team rule of law is a little bit more open on access of information, a more transparent mode of information sharing. Team authoritarian really wants to control information more. Information can be very dangerous and harmful, and therefore they need to restrict it and control it. And then you've got the people in between who haven't decided. And they may never decide. But you've got the people being tugged between the two. And as time goes on, this will probably intensify, and I wouldn't be surprised if in years there's really sort of the rule of law network in routing and sort of the authoritarian model of routing and those in between. That's a little controversial. I don't like it. Coming from ICANN, I want one open, interoperable internet, but I'm also kind of a realist. Now, thrown into the mix of this, between those kind of competing groups, I guess they were always there, but they were never in the forefront. And when Russia invaded the Ukraine, a new force emerged or presented itself. And I'm calling them, and I got this idea, I can't remember the original source, but it's the super empowered individual or the super empowered organization. And it's not government, and it's not Microsoft. It could be a group of people or an individual. Let me give you an idea about the superpowered individual. How many people here, show of hands, use spam block lists? Right? How many people use like the drop list or bogon filtering lists? Right? You're counting on other people to create these lists that then you use to restrict access to your email or your routing. Right? So think of it this way. The people who run Spamhaus, they're super empowered. They could add something, a domain name, to the spam list, and you would drop that traffic. Right? They have an outsized amount of influence. So Russia invades Ukraine, and people are outraged. Human rights violations, war crimes, people want to make an impact. People are pissed, and they don't think the government's doing enough. Government starts sanctioning. What do people do? Well, the MongoDB project, open source database, big project, they decide that they don't want any more Russian projects on the MongoDB hub, and they just delete all Russian projects. Boom, gone. That'd be sort of like GitHub just deciding to delete everything in Russia, right? Nominet, Internet Registrar in the UK, the board gets together, hears from the lawyer. Lawyer says there are these sanctions against these wealthy Russians, and you're selling domains in Russia, and we're concerned about credit card payments. There's a lot of liability of you processing credit cards in Russia. So the board of Nominet says, you know what? We won't process credit cards in Russia. Nobody in Russia can renew their domain names. Do you think somebody might squat on them and they expire? So companies are rushing in. Communities that want to do something are super empowered, and they're a new player on the field. And we're going to have to learn to live with that. In the olden days, Paul, if you're in the room, I might make a little fun of you, Paul Vixie. When Paul was the principal author of Bind, the DNS program, at the time, Bind had, this is years ago, maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it had about 82% of the market. So 82% of the internet domain name resolution was coming from Bind. And if Paul wanted to change Bind, guess who controlled name service on the internet? It was essentially Paul, one guy, right? And so we would have all these debates about governments and regulation, and I was just thinking, yeah, but Paul. You know, I mean, you gotta, if Paul's not happy with it, you might say, you know what, we're not gonna have a domain name service to Russia anymore. And if Paul wanted to change the root.hints file and add new root servers, well, one guy could. And I think what's happening now is we have to recognize this. It's always been around, but we have an outsized amount of influence. Our communities have an outsized amount of influence. Just think about how much influence the Log4j developer had, right? And we're going to have to recognize that and own it. Because I think this is going to be the tip of the iceberg, right? These super empowered individuals. And so when I talk to people in government, say, there's this initiative that there's going to be a talk later on in the week about sanctions.net. And the idea behind sanctions.net, there was an open paper around it, and the thinking is, just like your spam block list, just like your drop list, should there be a list that enumerates all the net blocks and domain names of sanctioned individuals, sanctioned companies, or governments? So instead of MongoDB having delete everything in Russia, MongoDB could just say, you know what, we're implementing the sanctions list. Nobody on the sanctions list can connect to our services, email addresses, whatever. And they can target it much more specifically to a government entity and not the general population of these innocent internet users that have nothing to do with the invasion of Ukraine. And so interesting results. Some people debate it and say, yes, we should, no, we shouldn't. It kicked off this big debate. Other people in some of the more engineering type communities caused them to think about maybe their role. Do they have any obligation? Are there any ethical considerations on what they're doing? So the engineers had to huddle. Nope, we're fine. No problem. Everything that we're doing is perfect. No need to question any of our decisions. I'm glad that soul searching happened over the weekend, and we're all fine now. So when I talk to people in government about this, they say, we're a little nervous because sanctions are what we do, governments. It's like, yeah, but I mean, companies have the right to serve whoever they want. If they don't want to route to you, they're not routing to you. Oh, yeah, we understand that. It still makes us nervous. It's like, yeah, well, welcome to our world, We're really nervous about a lot of this stuff going on, and so you better step it up, government, because we're going to fill in the gaps if you're not on the job. So with that, I'm thinking, looking forward, where do we go from here? I can see it's going to be more chaotic. I can see that what we do is going to become even more consequential. I can see we're probably going to be asked to deal with issues that were not traditionally topics we dealt with, right? Mis, dis, malinformation wasn't really an area of study until 2014, 2015. Now it's all about how we create models and filter content or identify content. So it's going to be my pleasure to introduce the keynote, Chris Krebs, the first director of CISA and partner at the Krebs Stamos group, which is kind of cheating because the Stamos is Alex Stamos, who's also been a past Black Hat keynote. And he's going to give us his insights to see where he thinks we're going from here. What comes next? We've survived the first quarter century. What are we going to be facing in the future? So with that, it's been my pleasure to welcome you all. Thank you very much for coming. And now I'm going to hand it over to Chris Krebs.
Wow. Good morning, everybody. Jeff, thanks for the introduction. This talk is rated TLP Red Pants. It's great to be back here. Thanks for that introduction this morning. It's a little bit early, and we are back in Vegas. I don't know how many times y'all have been back since COVID, but it's a little weird to be back in these big groups. So thanks for coming out this morning, and this could be fun. So when Jeff and Steve reached out to me and said, hey, we'd like you to consider opening up Black Hat, I was a little stumped on what I'd say. Because when you're a government official, you've got like this whole raft of staff that you can ask 3 months in advance to go develop some initiative that you can launch at a big conference. So I don't have that. When you're a vendor, right, you can launch a new product. I don't have that. And so I was thinking about it, I was like, oh God, all right, so what do I have? What's different? What can I bring to this? And so I really kind of started thinking about my time at CISA, why I was there, what I got done there, and what it is that I might add that's interesting. And what I really kind of came down to is I'm a bridge builder. I'm a partner builder. I bring people together to solve problems. I'm a middle child, and that's part of it, right? You're always working to find compromise, identify problems, put together solutions with groups, and address some of the challenges we have. And that's, frankly, why I tend to think that we at CISA were successful. I was in the right place at the right time at a singularly important moment in American history. And I think we did a pretty damn good job. And so what I wanted to do is bring a little bit of that experience, that flavor to this talk. And what I've been doing over the last 18 months is kind of wandering in the wilderness, going across the country, other countries as well, talking to officials in the private sector, federal government, state and local, and trying to understand what they're trying to accomplish, what their aspirations are, what their hopes are, what their concerns are, what their challenges are, and kind of what keeps them up at night. And so through the course of all these conversations, it seems that we all are orienting around three main questions. The first question is, why is it so bad right now? Why does it seem that we're fighting this uphill battle? And so as we work through kind of my take, their take, the collective take of why we think it's so bad right now, you know, it kind of goes to this pivot of like, well, I mean, it's going to get better, right? And then they see my reaction, and they're like, well, what do you mean it's going to get worse? So then we kind of work through, well, what are the trend lines that are out there? What are the market pressures? What are the forces and inflection points that we're seeing out ahead of us that are influencing technology, governments, bad actors, us, people? And then everyone kind of like slumps back in their chair. It's like, what the hell are we going to do about it? Because this isn't hopeless, right? There are things that we can do here. And that's what I want to work through with you today here. Why is it so bad right now? What do you mean it's going to get worse? And third, what do we do about it? How can we as a community in this room, in Vegas right now this week, what are we able to do to contribute to solve the challenges that are in front of us? So why is it so bad? It's 4 reasons as I see it. Not exclusively 4 reasons, but 4 main reasons. It's the technology, it's the bad actors, it's the government, and yeah, it's us, it's people. So on the technology side, I think what sums it up best for me is a quote from a couple years ago by Daniel Miessler. And if you're not following Daniel and sign up for his weekly newsletter, you're really missing out. But his quote is, basically, software remains vulnerable because the benefits of insecure products far outweigh the downsides. Once that changes, software security will improve, but not a moment before. That echoes something that Bruce Schneier said a decade or so ago. We operate inside a larger ecosystem, right? Inside businesses that are focused on productivity, reducing friction. They tend to see us, security, as slowing things down. First to market, right? You want to be first to market, or even second to market. But security is seen as friction. And what's happening is as we are integrating more and more insecure products into use cases, we're making it more complicated to manage risk. Now, as I see it, one of the areas where this is happening at an accelerated pace is in the cloud. So over the last couple years, COVID drove this incredible acceleration to the cloud during the digital transformation. Now, what we've done is increase flexibility, elasticity, productivity, efficiency, but we've also reduced things, right? Transparency. Can't see what's happening on the backplane of the cloud. So we've made it more complex. And we've also started adding on additional products on top of the infrastructure. on the platforms. And we have this explosion of software as a service opportunities and options out there. And then, along the way, our leadership has become radically efficient. That's happening right now at an accelerated pace as economic headwinds are on the horizon. And organizations are saying, look, if I can't do it well, I'm going to have somebody else that does it well do it for me. We're talking about things like HR and payroll and business management services. So we're building more products that are insecure by design because of the market pressures, and then we're making it more and more complex. Now, there is good news, right? We are here, evidence of that. 10 years ago, think back, how many products were there? Vendors, security products, right? We have a vibrant, robust ecosystem. And yes, vendors, technology vendors, are addressing some of the underlying vulnerabilities. But is it happening at the pace that we want it to? But what are we really talking about here through this diversity of products and complexity and use cases? It's attack surface, right? It's opportunities for the bad guys to come in and get what they want. And I think over the last couple years, the biggest, perhaps collective falling down of government, of industry, is on ransomware. What is ransomware, right? It is a bad guy that's figured out how to monetize a vulnerability or a misconfigured system. That's it. They've extracted value from that stuff that Daniel Miessler is talking about. And it's been able to shift through cryptocurrency to safe havens. And what that's done in the meantime is distracting our intelligence community, our national security community that was 5 years ago focused on the highest order threat, the MSS of China, the PLA, Russia, SVR, GRU, FSB, Iran, IRGC. And now they have had to broaden their view of threat actors to include cyber criminals. My take here is that we've kind of fetishized the advanced persistent threat. We've over-rotated on the MSS. We've over-rotated on the SVR when cyber criminals have been eating our lunch in the meantime. When that was the design basis threat. That was the threat model for every organization all along. If you're on the internet, you're on the playing field for them. If you're using email, if you're connecting anything, their opportunistic target sets are much, much greater. That said, can't take our eyes off the top of the threat hierarchy, and what we're seeing is the threat actors at the top. They understand what the shifts in our businesses are. They understand that we're making things more complex, that we're relying on more software and trusted updates. My business partner, Alex, said something in a meeting about 6 months ago that really stuck with me. Companies that are shipping products are shipping targets. If you're hosting a service, you're the target. That's how the targeting sets are happening for the SVR and the MSS. They understand the dependencies and the trust connections that we have on our software services and technology providers, and they're working up the ladder through the supply chain. There's a terrible joke I'll tell. Decades ago, Willie Sutton, big bank robber, they asked Willie, "Why do you rob banks?" He said, "Because that's where the money is." It's the same idea here with software providers, with managed service providers. Why do adversaries target software supply chain? Because that's where the access is. That's where the data is, the ability to work in at scale and go one-to-many and conduct breakouts. That's what we're seeing the actors doing. So what's the government been doing? Well, the government has struggled, and I'll use the US government here, the government has struggled with balancing market interventions, regulation, with the desire in a capitalist economy to allow innovation to grow, right? We hear that all the time, that regulation stifles innovation. And as a result, what we've had is an uneven application of market interventions or regulations. If you ask the financial services folks, they'll say, what do you mean uneven? We're regulated 6 ways to Sunday. And that's right. Duplicative at the federal and state level regulations on banks. And then it kind of drops off. And so we've seen the government struggle here. And as a result, we're not getting the outcomes we want. And I have to think that even when the government does regulate, they don't necessarily do it right. They don't do it well. We see an over-reliance on checklists and compliance rather than performance-based outcomes. And I think we're seeing an improvement here. CISA released some performance guidance recently. We need more of that. We're also seeing it, the case where it's still difficult to work with the government. It's still difficult for a private sector organization to know who to work with. Is it the FBI? Is it CISA? Is it the Department of Energy? Is it Treasury? I don't know where to go. It's still just too hard to work with government, and the value prop isn't as clear as it needs to be. You've got to fix that. The last thing is that government also has to kind of clean up its own act. One of the recommendations that I saw in the Cyberspace Solarium report from 2 years ago was that Congress needs to figure it out as well. Congress needs to establish select committees in the House and the Senate that consolidate oversight over the various departments and agencies, particularly in the civilian branch, where you have 101 civilian agencies, and every single one of them is running their own email service. So we got to fix that. And then the last reason here is it's us, it's the people, right? Our leaders are not leading. The CEO that understands cyber risk as a business risk is few and far between. Now it's changing. You know, I think Colonial woke a lot of people up last year. But so we don't have a system that changes that balance of the value of secure products. We also have workforce challenges. There was a summit 2 weeks ago at the White House. Big tech companies came and they made pledges and promises and support. We have various initiatives. Right now, alongside Black Hat, we have the Diana Initiative. So we have mechanisms in place, but we have to accelerate. We have to accelerate. I have 5 kids in the K through 12 system, and they go to a pretty good school, but there aren't opportunities for them to experience coding. We don't have a technology-oriented curriculum like some other countries. Another thing we got to fix. And so as we kind of move out of this and think about, well, where are we going from here? I reached out to a network of folks, much smarter than me, and I said, look, what's your take on what's happening right now? 3, 4, 5 years out, are things going to be better, are they going to be worse? Are you bearish or bullish? And the general responses were bearish in the short term, bullish in the long term. Things are going to get worse before they get better is kind of the takeaway, which is really a fascinating dichotomy. And so I wanted to kind of break down and understand, why are we seeing that? What are the pressures we're seeing right now, or lack thereof, that can continue these trend lines that I think we all agree are not sufficient. They're not where we as a community want them to go. And so back at the top with technology, I think we all agree there's going to be more stuff connected. We have a pathological need to connect things to the internet, seemingly. I said that in a congressional testimony last year. And kind of a little rhetorical device I'll use is ask people, close your eyes, sit back, think 3, 4 years into the future. You're at the office, you're at home, you're in your car, you're at the doctor's office, whatever. Are there going to be more things around you that are collecting data, that are generating data? I mean, the answer, of course, is more. In our car, at home, on our body, in our body. More. I mean, how many of you are wearing those Aura rings to compare sleep patterns against each other? These things are generating an incredible amount of data exhaust, digital exhaust. And so, again, it's this opportunity space. And they're becoming more complex, not less. And I think back to 1984, the year, William Gibson released the book Neuromancer. I think most people remember Neuromancer for coining the term cyberspace. But to me, it's how he described cyberspace that was so captivating, that really resonated with me. The unthinkable complexity of cyberspace. We're there right now. I've asked people, like, do you really understand how the cloud works across the various hyperscale vendors and how you interact with it and what visibility you have? The answers aren't always what you want to hear. So things are getting more complex. We're generating more data. But I'll say this, again, evidenced by Black Hat at 25. We have a maturing industry. We're producing and generating products that are solving problems. We have technology vendors that are working to solve core problems in the infrastructure. But is it happening at the pace we want it to, that we need it to? Why? Because the bad actors are getting their wins, and until we make meaningful consequences and impose costs on them, they will continue. Ransomware is here, and it's so prevalent, and it's gotten professionalized, and the barriers to entry have dropped, and now they have availability or options to exploits that were the remit of nation states only a couple years ago. Because the money's there, they're profiting, and it's not costing them anything. They're not feeling pain. Fortunately, that has changed to a certain extent. We just saw a mixer get sanctioned, Tornado, the other day. So we have to do more of that. And that's just the non-state actors. What about the state actors? So we typically talk about China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, right? But here's the thing. I mean, literally every country on the face of this earth is looking at the digital ecosystem as a new domain, the fifth domain. They're developing capabilities for espionage, for domestic surveillance. And yeah, they're also looking at capabilities for destruction and disruption. So we have a threat actor set that's absolutely exploding. And guess what? There are going to be splashy, new, and novel events in the near future. Just think back the last several years. I mean, let's just start with Ukraine, with the Russians turning the lights out in Ukraine 2 years in a row. Then we had WannaCry. Then we had NotPetya. Then we had Bad Rabbit. And then you get into the SVR and Nobelium and SolarWinds. It is continuing to happen, and it will continue to happen. And on the government side, we have seen in the last year or so an interest in improving authorities. CISA continues to get the funding it needs and empowerment it needs and the authorities it needs. But I think we're going to see a slowdown in some of that funding. I think we're going to see a slowdown in the Congress's interest in providing additional authorities so that we can have appropriate market interventions. Government still has to figure out how to engage, how to manage its own systems. And then we have the people part. Yeah, our leaders are getting smarter. Every day we have someone exit the workforce and we have someone that enters the workforce. And our workforce is becoming increasingly tech native. And this is actually probably the area that I'm most optimistic. Every day that goes by, our workforce becomes increasingly tech native. On the upside, they're savvier. But kind of what Jeff was alluding to with the mis, dis, and malinformation piece, are they becoming more discerning? Are the critical thinking skills coming along with the technology savviness that we're looking for? The second question that I asked the network was fine. You're near-term bearish, long-term bullish. Help me understand that pivot. What's the dichotomy? How are we going to make that change? What are the influence points, the inflection points, the moments, the opportunities to shape the future? So starting on the technology side, again, their answers oriented around a core set of themes. So on technology, what we've kind of arrived at is, as Jeff was talking about with some of the decisions around the Russian invasion of Ukraine, organizations, businesses have to have a set of principles. You have to establish your values, who you are as a company, what you're out there to accomplish, how you're going to do it, what your red lines are. When Russia invaded Ukraine, we were working with a couple different companies that said, look, we're not impacted by sanctions, so we're good. We don't really need to worry about it. Our take was, no, look, I'm telling you, when images of war crimes start showing up on TV and on Twitter and elsewhere, you're going to have a problem if you're continuing, or at least perceived to continue, to support the Russian war machine. You have to make decisions now on the kind of company you are and how you're holding yourself out. So you have to have those principles. As a part of that, we have to also understand that if you are core to the fabric of the internet right now, which is really the core to the fabric of the economy, yeah, you're part of the national security community. You may not be in the intelligence community, but your mission is oriented around national security outcomes. And you have to take security seriously. You have to have it as a boardroom issue. And this isn't just the big banks, the big technology companies. This is increasingly mid-market technology companies and software providers that have become systemically important over the last decade, that have elevated privileges within networks and the ability to access sensitive crown jewels of an organization. You have to be thinking differently about your threat model. So you have to set those principles. The second part is our products, right? We need to continue to develop products that solve the challenges that we encounter every single day. But we also need the technology vendors that own, manage, operate, develop, deploy the core. Yeah, we're working on the edge. We're doing a great job at the edge. But back to the core products and solutions out there, we have to solve the hard problems that continue to persist. And yes, it may impact the bottom line of your security services business, but it's more important to solve the underlying challenges rather than the Band-Aid on the edge. And the last thing is we need leaders to plan out beyond the next 2 quarters. You have to look 3 to 4 years out. So right now, every single company out there should be conducting simulations, scenarios, impact assessments, tabletop exercises at the executive level around what's happening in the Strait of Taiwan. Organizations need to be saying, how could a Chinese invasion of Taiwan impact me? My supply chain, my market, how could the political headwinds affect me? How could it affect my IT operations? You have to game these things out, because I don't know if it's going to happen tomorrow, next year, 3 or 4 years out, but based on the conversations I have with national security officials, they're pretty confident that that's going to come to a head between China and Taiwan. And if you want to be in a position to de-risk your operations, to manage risk to your organization, you have to start that yesterday. If you want to physically segment your networks in Taiwan, you got to start that now. So we need organizations thinking forward, not just dealing with today's problems, but planning ahead and starting to implement for where you want to be 2 to 3 years out. And then we have government. How can the government shape the future? So I tend to think about the government as having 4 main roles in how they interact with the technology and the digital ecosystem: consumer, enforcer, defender, and enabler. Consumer. Department of Defense. The US Department of Defense is likely the largest customer of most of the big tech firms. The US government itself is a massive tens of billions, just shy probably of 100 billion, that's just on the civilian side, consumer of IT products and services. They have incredible purchasing power. They need to use it. They have to set the bar higher. Lowest price technically acceptable cannot be the procurement and acquisition model. We have to move faster. We have to fail faster. We have to continue moving forward. The second piece on the enforcement side, that's regulation, and that's law enforcement. So on the regulation side, the market is not working right now. We need not necessarily more regulation, we need smarter regulations that are determined and based on outcomes and not checklists. It has to be smart, looking at the economy itself and what those core functions are. So we're not necessarily talking about small and medium businesses. But if you're a critical infrastructure that underpins the continuity of the economy, we have to have a better understanding of the security posture. On the law enforcement side, I've seen the right kind of movements out of the Department of Justice and FBI of going more aggressively at the adversary, at command and control infrastructure of cyber criminals. We need to continue that. We need to shift from longer-term investigations towards more disruptive actions in preventing their ability, imposing costs, and eliminating their ability to extract value from companies here in the US. On the defender side, we need Cyber Command, we need the intelligence community to continue pushing out moving forward. In preparation of the 2020 elections, the US government, Department of Defense, worked with partners over there to have a better understanding of what the TTPs, what the capabilities and the malware of state actors, what were those advantages they had. Brought it back here, we exposed some of those campaigns. But what I found more important or valuable was we also figured out what their targeting set was and what they were going after: election night reporting, voter registration databases. That sort of insight allowed state and local election officials to prepare, to put that last dollar to harden a target that you knew the adversary was interested in. We need more of that. And lastly, on the enabler side, yeah, I'm going to say it, I'm a homer, continue to invest and build CISA out. Make it easier, less complex for organizations to work with the government and get value out of it. Instead of going to 5 or 6 different agencies, make the front door clearly visible, and as I see it, that's CISA. We also need to do more of what we saw in the run-up to Russia, Ukraine, where the intelligence community was rapidly declassifying sensitive information about the battle plans. That froze the Russians. That was information warfare. That worked. We need more of that. We need to put that information in the hands of the defenders. All that said, I'm not naive enough to think that slight course corrections of individual agencies is going to be enough. I'm ready to make the argument that the digital environment around us has changed so dramatically in the last 25 years, while our government hasn't kept up pace, has lagged, is slow. The slope lines don't have the same trajectory. I think it's time to rethink the way government interacts with technology. I think we need to take a hard look at the way government's organized. And there's precedent for this. 1939, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt worked with the Congress to pass the Reorganization Act of 1939. Passed 3 different reorganization plans the Congress approved to reshape, to make a government of the people that worked for the people. We're in that same space right now. I think we have to take a hard look at the way we're organized and make a smarter, more efficient, more organized government. And I'm ready to lead that charge. Working at the Aspen Institute with the team at Aspen Digital, we're going to take a look at this. We're going to look at what are the various outcomes, what are the various organizational structures that we could see. From a far end of the spectrum heavy package of establishing a US digital agency that could take elements of CISA, elements of NIST and NTIA, the Department of Energy and the national labs, maybe bits and pieces of the FTC and the FCC, but make an agency that's focused on empowering of better digital risk management services. And I'm not just talking about cyber, I'm talking about privacy, I'm talking about trust and safety issues. We're not where we need to be, and we're falling behind, and Americans are suffering as a result. But you know what? I also don't have a whole lot of confidence right now that this Congress can get that done, can get something as broad and envisioning as an effort like that. So we're going to have to look at different possible outcomes. The other side of the spectrum could be something as simple as pulling CISA out of the Department of Homeland Security as a sub-cabinet agency. It's allowed to operate as an operational agency on its own. We also have to kind of think through, what are we prioritizing for? What are we optimizing for? Is it public-private partnerships? Is it a regulatory framework? We have to take a harder look at the way we're organized. I'm also not naive enough to think that the technology vendors, that the government on their own are going to fix this, fix any of it. Ultimately, my take, as Jeff mentioned, it's going to come down to the people in this room that are here for summer camp this week, that are in this community. It's going to take us as leaders to make the changes that we want to see. And so, as I was thinking back to my time at CISA, I had a pretty basic approach to leadership. And it was based on a framework that I stole from a boss at Microsoft, and it was the 5 Ps. People, policy, programs, public affairs, and politics. I said if we succeed and win in those 5 Ps, then we're going to be successful as an agency. Over time, as we were working through how we were doing, it occurred to me that we were missing a P. And that P was partners. CISA, again, fundamentally is a voluntary organization for public-private partnerships. So yeah, you got to have your people. Without your people, you don't have anything. So you had to have that. The next most important thing for us was partners. And then policy and programs, public affairs and politics. But that made it 6 Ps, and I like 5s, you know, odd numbers. So we dropped the politics. And there was a reason for that. Because right now, cybersecurity has to be apolitical, non-political, bipartisan, nonpartisan, however you want to call it. That's how we ran CISA. It's awesome to see Jen Easterly continue that tradition. And it was my job as the Senate confirmed director to handle the politics piece. So that was the 5 Ps we ran under: people, partners, policy, programs, public affairs. So as I was standing up a consulting practice, I said, how do I apply that same model, that same mindset of leadership? And it came down to principles. Got to know what you stand for, what's important to you, and how you're going to act. People, of course, your people. Partners. Planning, talked about the planning piece, and then public engagement. And the public engagement piece is about being transparent, about being candid, being forthright, maintaining and establishing trust with your partners. Just look at the incident response communications over the last year or so. The organizations that are upfront and candid and transparent about what's going on and what the plan is and how they're working on the problem, they're the ones that maintain trust of their partners, of their customers, of the government. So public engagement is an incredibly important part of leadership. But back to that people part, again, we need more of them. And it's been kind of confounding to me how we continue to face workforce shortages. We hear about the 3 million open cybersecurity jobs in the community. And I'm just trying to figure out, like, why are we not solving the gaps? Why are we not closing the gaps? So a couple weeks ago, I was at an event, and Dr. Hugh Thompson, formerly of Symantec, now with Crosspoint Capital, and I think he runs another conference in San Francisco or something. He had his own kind of 5 elements of how you talk about our community, what it is we do here, and how rewarding a career in this industry is. The first thing is it's fun. I don't know about y'all, but like the last 18 months for me have been probably the most fun in my career. Yes, I had fun at CISA. I'm having more fun now. The second is it's lucrative. We get paid pretty well in this industry. I had to run a whole bunch of different compensation models and comparisons as we were at CISA to figure out why are we not attracting the talent we need. And when you look at pay in this industry, it's pretty illuminating. So yeah, it pays well. The third, relatedly, it's durable. We are going to be dealing with these challenges for the rest of our lives, and perhaps the rest of human history. There will be digital and technologically related risk issues that we're going to have to solve. So it's durable. It's also really interesting stuff. I mean, the last 6 months alone of geopolitical risk colliding with technology risk have been fascinating problems we've had to solve. And then the last thing, I've already talked about this, but these are national security issues. The mission, the impact, the import of what we're doing is incredibly important. So we have to start talking about what we do here in terms, I think, that are going to draw the workforce. And I think Hugh's got a good start on that narrative. But the last piece here, it's not on the leaders, it's not on everybody else in the workforce, it's on us individually. And so last week I had the chance to go on a podcast. It's called 5-Factor Authentication with a guy named Hill Harper. And he's a Harvard lawyer, but he's also an actor. He was in He Got Game and CSI New York and The Good Doctor, but now he does this podcast about life in this digital environment. How do you maintain a wholesome, fulsome life? And he asked this question at the end that I wasn't ready for, but the question was, what are the 5 factors that you live your life by to lead a meaningful life online and offline? Like I said, I wasn't really ready for it. It took me a little bit of time to figure it out. But my first answer was, again, principles. Figure out who you are, what you stand for, how you're going to live your life, and live your life accordingly. You got to know what's important to you and what you stand for. And then take a stand when you have to. The second thing was people. I've talked about people a lot today. Find your people. Find your support networks. If it's family, great. Part of what we're doing this week out here is about our people, our networks. Find your people. They're going to be there for you. Help them. They will help you. The third factor is life's too short to work for assholes. So don't. Right? Now, I'm not saying quit your job tomorrow, because that would be stupid. But if you're not happy, if you're not valued, if you're not respected, if you're not treated like you think you deserve to be treated, make a plan. Find that place for you. Work with your people. The fourth factor is life's too short to eat bad food. What I really mean is find something you enjoy that gives you meaning, value outside of your day job, right? That's what I think this community does so incredibly well. So during COVID, Bryson Bort did Unicorn Chef. I got to go on a couple times, but it brought people together in something outside of just talking about bears and dragons and stuff. It allows you to connect and develop as people. You're also seeing out here mentorship. So what Leslie Carhart and Kimber Dowsett are doing with resume reviews. Find something that gives you value, that makes you feel rewarded, whether it's in your community, whether it's out here, whatever it is, find something that gives you purpose and value. And then the last factor was, for the love of God, do not read the comments. Don't listen to some rando on the internet that's telling you you suck, right? That's why you have your network. Seek feedback, meaningful, constructive feedback from your people. I'm telling you right now, if you know what you stand for, and if you live by those principles, if you have a group around you that supports you, that you support them, if you find meaning in something outside of just your job, when you stumble, you will, we all stumble, you're going to get back up and you're going to keep going forward. And so when you leave here today, be smart, be safe, but do something good this week. Help somebody. And I'm confident that we can fix this. We can move forward and get those safety, those security outcomes that we're trying to. So thanks for your time this morning. Be smart, be safe, do something good, help somebody out. Thank you. All right.
Chris Krebs. Okay, a couple housekeeping announcements real quick. Next session starts at 10:20, and a lot of action is going to be happening this evening around the business hall. Starting tonight, or starting right now, I guess, we've got the Arsenal tools demos in the business hall, both today and tomorrow. Check out some new apps, some demonstrations from the tool creators, maybe build your toolkit a little bit. And then the evening, in the demo, where the demos are held during the day, in the evening, the welcome reception starts with a pub crawl, 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. tonight. And at 5 p.m. it switches over to the welcome reception, same location, 5 to 6 p.m. And then halfway through the reception at 5:30, the infamous Pony Awards start, and that's in Lagoon K and L. And then tomorrow, back here at 9 o'clock for our day 2 keynote with Kim Zetter. So thank you very much. I'll see you around.